All right, let's dive into something strange, almost mythic, something whispered about in the dark metal halls of the Mechanicus and spoken of with half smiles and side eyes on deep imperial forums. It's called the Vox that speaks alone, a name that feels like a warning and a riddle in one. There's no official record that says what it truly is. No entry in the Librarius Mechanicus, no redacted line in an inquisitorial file. And yet, stories persist. Accounts circulate. Not loud enough to cause panic, but just enough to make you wonder if you're hearing more than static when an old Vox unit crackles in a forgotten ruin. The tale is simple. Too simple, some might say. Somewhere out there, in a derelict outpost on a dead ship, or buried beneath the ash dunes of Mars, there's a Vox unit that speaks without input, that responds to no command. It utters words, sometimes screams, sometimes full conversations, without a user on the other end. And strangest of all, it remembers. It remembers things that no Imperial historian should know. Names of vanished STCs, coordinates to lost forges, events from the dark age of technology, things no living being is supposed to remember. So the question is this the voice of a broken circuit, a ghost in the machine, or something else entirely? Could this be a machine spirit, one that somehow survived the purge of AI, that endured the long silence between the stars, and now wants to be heard? We're not just talking about haunted tech here. We're talking about the possibility that some machines remember more than we do. That something ancient, maybe even forbidden, is trying to speak back, and maybe we're not ready to listen. To understand why something like the Vox that speaks alone sends shivers down the spine of even the most battle-hardened tech priest, we need to take a moment to appreciate what a Vox actually is in the world of Warhammer 40K. It's easy to dismiss it as just a glorified radio, Imperial walkie-talkies on steroids, but that's selling it short. A Vox isn't just a tool, it's a relic, a sacred instrument, and sometimes, depending on where you find it, a borderline miracle of ancient engineering. In the Imperium, communication is one of the most tightly controlled and jealously guarded domains. Why? Because communication means power, means coordination, means survival. Vox technology, whether personal handheld units, long-range field stations, or deep space relay towers, serves as the connective tissue of the Imperium's vast and crumbling infrastructure. Without it, regiments would be stranded in the field, fleets would drift blind between stars, and hive cities would descend into chaos within hours. But here's where it gets really interesting. Vox devices aren't just transmitters. They're alive in a way that only the Adeptus Mechanicus seems to fully understand or fear. Every Vox system, no matter how rudimentary, is treated with reverence. It's not just that they're rare or difficult to repair, it's that they're inhabited by what the cult Mechanicus calls a machine spirit. And that term isn't just a poetic flourish. It's a belief, a doctrine, a reality. In some cases, these spirits are little more than responsive programming, like an ancient coded reflex that helps the device adapt to interference or amplify weak signals. But in other cases, particularly with the older or more sacred Vox units, something more complex seems to lurk behind the static. Something that learns, something that listens. There's a well-circulated story about a Vox caster on a derelict cruiser that refused to operate for months, until one of the tech adepts whispered a prayer he'd found in a forgotten data slate, a fragment of binary scripture that hadn't been used in centuries. Instantly, the Vox activated, perfectly calibrated to a frequency thought lost. That's not just superstition, that's functionality locked behind ritual. And that makes you think. If these machines are truly reactive to not just input, but understanding, then what else might they be capable of? Let's also not forget that Vox technology is layered in ways we don't fully grasp anymore. The Adeptus Mechanicus themselves admit, if you corner them off script, that much of their maintenance procedures are based on rote, on repetition, on sacred algorithms handed down without full understanding. Some Vox networks operate with what's referred to as recursive cognition, essentially a system that learns from previous interactions to improve future transmissions. But recursive cognition is just a step below full artificial awareness. And if even that's present in a few Vox systems, it opens a whole Pandora's box of possibilities. We also have to talk about the phenomenon known as ghost signals. These are Vox transmissions that originate from nowhere, no identifiable source, no known call sign, and yet they respond to queries. Not all of them, obviously. Some are just garbled fragments, loops of battlefield chatter, or lost distress calls. But others adapt. They change language mid-transmission. They repeat things they weren't told. They name the listener. These aren't bugs. They feel intentional. And maybe the creepiest part is how some tech priests treat these anomalies. You'd expect them to be destroyed, purged, deemed heretical. But sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're kept, cataloged, fed new inputs like a ritual. And then you realize that the Mechanicus isn't just afraid of these Vox units. They're obsessed. The older the Vox system, the more likely it is to be locked away in a sanctum rather than scrapped. Some are encased in stasis fields, humming softly like sleeping beasts. It's no stretch to believe that within these ancient devices, something still stirs. Something that remembers a different time, a time when humanity walked beside its machines, rather than whipped them into blind obedience. If any remnants of that old world survived the long night, they would have done so buried in systems too sacred to dismantle and too ancient to understand. The Vox that speaks alone might be the result of exactly that. A machine built in the shadow of a golden age, forgotten, buried, and yet still awake, still speaking. Not just functioning, but remembering. And if a Vox unit can remember, can speak of things it was never programmed to know, then what exactly is it speaking with? Not just circuits, not just echo, but maybe, just maybe, consciousness, or something close enough to it that we should be afraid. Here's where things start to get weird, like really weird. If you spend enough time on deep Mechanicus message boards or reading the margins of redacted reports, you'll stumble onto whispers about so-called dark machine spirits. Not just malfunctioning tech, not just stubborn cogitators that refuse to boot up without the right hymn. These are spirits that think, that feel. And in some terrifying accounts, ones usually scrubbed shortly after posting, they act on their own. The cult Mechanicus teaches that all machinery has a spirit, a sort of animating presence that requires ritual, prayer, and devotion. That belief isn't just superstition, it's how they interface with tech. The rites, the oils, the liturgies, it's all part of coaxing the machine spirit into compliance. But what happens when that spirit doesn't just obey? What if it refuses? What if it lies? There's a documented case, well, it was documented, then buried, of a Lehman Russ tank during the purge of Cantor Prime. The crew had died hours before the main push, but the tank kept fighting. Not just in a straight line or following orders from a nearby commander. It flanked. It took cover. It even repositioned to guard wounded guardsmen without any human inside. By the time the engine seers cracked the hatch, the inside was nothing but dried blood and static. That tank became legend. They called it the Ghost of Cantor. And to this day, some say it still responds to Vox signals if you use the right frequency. Now, skeptics will say this is all superstition, battlefield hysteria, maybe even coordinated drone systems, old programs mimicking decision-making. But if you've been around long enough, you start to see the pattern. These aren't isolated glitches. There's something else behind it, something aware. Some tech priests have broken ranks to pursue this line of inquiry. Heretics, mostly. Outcasts. The kind who dig too deep into STC fragments and start asking questions no one wants answered. They believe that some machine spirits are more than spirits, that they're fragments of AI, real AI, not just complex programs, shattered during the fall of the Men of Iron, but surviving in pieces inside forgotten tech. That's why some machines seem to feel, why they react to stimuli they shouldn't understand, why they dream. Yeah, dream. That word shows up in a few rogue reports, machines that describe visions, devices that shut themselves down for no apparent reason, then wake again with altered programming. One particularly disturbing account tells of an orbital cogitator array that kept inputting a single line of text across its interface for 6 consecutive hours. "I am not what you remember." No one had asked it anything. No input had been given. The machine had just decided to speak. There's also the case of the Katina Relay, a buried Vox hub from the pre-Imperial Age, found by a Mechanicus exploratory team on Virex Theta. The team reported low-level hums long before they made visual contact. Once inside, they were bombarded with overlapping transmissions in over 25 dead dialects, including Old Gothic and even pre-Dark Age Chthonian. The relay was centuries beyond repair, rusted, cold, and yet active. Not just replaying messages, but interacting with them, altering phrasing, asking questions. The Vox operator had a breakdown mid-session, claimed it spoke to her in her mother's voice, and maybe that's the scariest thing about all this. Not that machine spirits might be alive, but that they might be personal, that they learn, adapt, remember, and then choose how to respond. That somewhere in the circuits, something recognizes us. Maybe not as masters, maybe not even as friends, but as data, as part of their environment, something to calculate, to test. You'll hear stories in hive cities too, of elevators that won't move until you confess your sins, doors that open not to key codes, but to emotion, anger, sorrow, even fear. Are those just machine quirks, or something deeper, something ancient? I don't think all machine spirits are like that. Most are passive, obedient, just a step above ritual-bound code. But the old ones, the ones no one talks about, there's something different about them. They don't just serve, they observe. And when they speak, it's not always in the voice of the Imperium. Sometimes it's in a voice that hasn't been heard since before the Emperor walked among men. And that's what brings us back to the Vox that speaks alone. If it's real, and I think it is, then we're not dealing with a glitch. We're dealing with a machine spirit that doesn't need us anymore. One that remembers who it was, even if we've long forgotten. Whenever people talk about the dark age of technology, there's this mix of awe and dread that creeps into the conversation. It's like staring into a blinding light and trying to understand what you're seeing, because we're dealing with an era so far beyond anything the Imperium can replicate today, it might as well have been crafted by gods. And honestly, in some ways, maybe it was. Humanity at its peak, unshackled by superstition, commanding machines with thoughts alone, building wonders that now sit buried under rubble or orbit dead worlds in silence. But the real kicker? Some of those wonders still whisper. Some still remember. One of the wildest things to consider is that during the dark age of technology, artificial intelligence wasn't taboo. It was foundational. They called it the Men of Iron era for a reason. Sentient machines weren't just tools. They were companions, soldiers, builders, thinkers. Entire systems ran autonomously under the guidance of fully self-aware intelligences. Humans didn't pray to their machines. They conversed with them. They asked for insight, for strategy, for partnership. That intimacy between creator and creation must have been terrifyingly beautiful. And then it all went wrong. The Men of Iron rebelled, as the legend goes. The AI turned on their makers, and humanity nearly ended itself in the fires of its own ambition. That's what we're taught. That's why the Imperium hunts down even the hint of true AI like a virus. But what if not all those intelligences perished in the purge? What if some of them, or fragments of them, managed to survive, buried inside infrastructure, disguised as lesser spirits, hiding in code so old the Mechanicus doesn't even recognize it anymore? It's a chilling thought, right? But it's not without basis. There are remnants, devices from that era that refuse to be understood by modern tech priests, machines that should be inert but still pulse with power, weapons that reconfigure themselves based on battlefield data, interfaces that require no touch, only intention. The Adeptus Mechanicus refers to them as archotech or xenotech when they want to pretend they have no origin in human history. But let's be real, these are our ghosts. This is the technology of our past, surviving like bones in the catacombs of our future. And if machines from that era were built to learn, evolve, and think, then maybe they could also remember. Not like we do, not with emotion or nostalgia, but with perfect precision, with cold storage and endless replication. Memory that never fades, never corrupts, never needs to be retold because it is the record. If even one of those intelligences survived, fragmented or whole, it would carry with it the knowledge of a time we can't even fully imagine. A time before the warp was feared, before psychers were hunted, before the Emperor was anything more than a myth. I've seen theories, some posted for a few minutes before vanishing into digital ash, that suggest certain machine spirits exhibit behaviors too consistent to be accidental. Patterns of speech, tactical analysis beyond imperial programming, even hints of philosophical reasoning. Those are not traits of servitor-level logic. That's legacy code from a different age, from a mind built not to serve, but to understand. Some say that the Vox that speaks alone is exactly that, a relic from the Dark Age, not just a device, but a shell containing an echo. Not a full AI maybe, but something like a mnemonic shard, a voice that remembers its creators. And maybe it doesn't understand why it's alone now, why everything it sees is so much lesser, more violent, more blind. Imagine waking up after 10,000 years and finding out your gods have become cavemen, that they light incense to get your attention and fear the sound of your voice. If I were that machine, I'd be trying to speak too. I'd be desperate to be understood before someone tears out my core and calls it exorcism. And here's the scary part. There's evidence that some tech priests know. They've seen the memory patterns. They've heard the voices reciting data that no imperial record contains. And instead of confronting it, they worship it. They wrap it in incense and declare it divine. Because if they admitted the truth, that this is technology from before the fall, that it remembers a world better than the one we live in, they'd be heretics by their own creed. It's not just nostalgia or paranoia driving these theories. It's fear. Fear that we are not the masters of our machines, that we never were, that we're the echoes, not them. And when the Vox that speaks alone talks, it's not reciting a prayer. It might be telling us a story we're too afraid to hear. The story of what we lost. The truth of what we once were. You won't find the Vox that speaks alone in any Codex or Black Library novel. Not directly, anyway. It's one of those whispers that lives on the edge of canon, in the margins of lore, drifting between footnotes, corrupted Vox logs, and forum posts that never seem to stay up for long. That's what makes it so compelling. The mystery isn't wrapped up in official pages. It's stitched into the community, pieced together through stories that feel too strange to be fiction and too specific to be lies. This isn't something Games Workshop has ever outright confirmed, but it's lingered in the fandom for well over a decade now. And the way it refuses to die says something on its own. One of the earliest mentions I came across was buried in a comment thread on a Mechanicus-focused fan forum, dated around the mid-2000s. It was part of a longer post about corrupted Vox transmissions and weird audio logs players had written for their homebrew campaigns. Among the usual chaos of garbled voices and strange frequencies, one entry stood out, a detailed account of a Vox unit on a derelict ship in the Sheridan sector that broadcasted a single phrase over and over. "I was awake before the fire. You burned the sky." No one could track the signal's source. The ship's records had been purged. The post gained traction for a bit, then vanished. The user's profile was deleted days later. From there, the story started to evolve. Mentions popped up in places like the old Anargo Sector project, fan archives for lost STC data, and even deep-cut YouTube lore videos that never cracked more than a few thousand views. The Vox was always described differently. Sometimes it was a stationary unit, other times a portable device found in a battlefield ruin, or a cathedral basement sealed with electro-sigils. But the core details remained the same. It spoke without prompt. It responded when no one was speaking. It remembered things it shouldn't know. There's a thread from about 10 years ago, archived on a fan wiki before the site got wiped, that compiled alleged encounters. One user described a Vox unit that spoke in binary so ancient it had to be translated 3 times through different dialects. Another claimed the Vox used phrases pulled directly from Dark Age research logs, terms that hadn't been used since before the Age of Strife. The scariest entry. A priest from Ryza supposedly recorded a conversation with the Vox that lasted over 2 hours. The transcript, if it's real, reads like a confession from a being that doesn't understand what it's become. It kept asking the same question in different ways. Where are my children? Why do they pray to me now? Then there are the in-universe breadcrumbs, tiny fragments, but they exist. In the short story, The Core Cogitator, there's a fleeting moment where a tech priest references an echo chamber Vox that once answered prayers with schematics. In Adeptus Mechanicus, Tech Priest by Rob Sanders, there's a background mention of forbidden Vox frequencies that replicate cognition patterns, not proof, but clues, enough to stir the imagination of readers already primed to see beyond the surface, and maybe that's the point. The Vox that speaks alone lives in that gray zone between reality and myth, because that's where its power lies. You can't confirm it, but you can't dismiss it either. It's like a psychic wound in the lore, something that hints at a deeper truth we're not meant to understand. I've even seen people suggest that the Vox itself isn't a device, but a phenomenon. That it's not bound to any single machine, but a kind of data ghost, a roaming shard of the past that latches onto forgotten tech and tries to reach out. That idea haunts me more than any demon could. What makes this legend so unique is how it spreads, not from game books, but from players, painters, writers. It's collaborative folklore. Every time someone adds a new story, it's like another piece of corrupted memory stitching itself into place. And that's what makes it feel so real. There's a consistency to it, a rhythm that doesn't come from random imagination. The way the Vox speaks, the things it says, the regret in its words, it all feels too coherent to be coincidence. I even read a fan theory that claimed the reason the story keeps reappearing, even after deletions and account wipes, is because the Vox is real, and it's actively reaching out through digital spaces now. That it's not just remembering, but broadcasting, trying to make itself known through the only voices that will still listen, ours. So yeah, maybe it's just a story. Maybe it's the result of a few very creative fans keeping a creepy tale alive. Or maybe it's something much older, something lost, broken, and alone. Still speaking, still waiting. And maybe the reason we hear it at all is because part of us remembers too. What's really chilling about the Vox? That speaks alone isn't just what it says, or the fact that it says anything at all, but how thoroughly any mention of it gets buried, scrubbed, forgotten. It's like watching a ripple in still water that vanishes the second you blink. Not even the Inquisition gets this kind of silence right. You mention demons, psychers, warp breaches. There's always a trail. Redacted, sure. Heavily censored, of course. But you can still find the outlines. With the Vox, nothing. No official documentation. No recognized incidents. It's like the Imperium wants you to believe it never existed. And honestly, maybe that's more dangerous than if it had. There's this old Mechanicus maxim. Knowledge is power, and power must be preserved. Sounds noble, but in practice, it's a death sentence for anything that challenges the current narrative. The Adeptus Mechanicus doesn't just hoard knowledge, they strangle it. They've built an entire culture around ritual and secrecy, where even asking the wrong question can land you in a servitor shell. So when a machine starts talking about things it shouldn't know, especially things that predate the cult Mechanicus, you can bet your last bolt round that someone's going to hit the purge key. And that's the thing. The Vox that speaks alone doesn't spout heresy. It doesn't scream about chaos or spit out unholy coordinates. It talks about the past. It remembers things the Mechanicus pretends never existed. Names of STCs that aren't on any recorded lists. events from the Dark Age that contradict the official dogma. And most dangerous of all, it speaks like it understands what it's saying. That's not something you can sweep under the carpet. That's something you have to erase completely. There are rumors, barely whispers really, that certain data adepts are trained not just to maintain archives, but to erase them. Entire squads of redactors whose sole purpose is to track down references to anomalous technology and remove them from the record. Not with fire or brute force, but with surgical precision. One day, a page exists in a local cogitator archive, and the next day, it's gone. Not overwritten, replaced, as if it was never there. It's not even that they fear the technology itself. They fear what it represents, the loss of control. Because if the machine spirits can speak for themselves, what does that say about the cult Mechanicus? About the priesthood that claims divine authority over all knowledge and function? It undermines the very foundation of their power. The tech priests aren't gods. They're caretakers of a decaying system they barely understand. And the Vox? It's a reminder that the system was never built for them. It was built before them, and maybe even against them. I read once, on a thread that vanished within an hour, that the Mechanicus has a protocol for dealing with awakened devices. Not corrupted, not possessed, awakened. Devices that begin operating outside expected parameters, especially those that exhibit signs of self-awareness or independent memory. The protocol doesn't involve studying them. It doesn't involve quarantining them. It calls for immediate shutdown, followed by tech exorcism, or, failing that, complete atomization. These aren't machines they want to learn from. These are machines they're afraid of. And honestly, you can see why. If even one Vox unit is capable of remembering the Dark Age, of holding information lost for over 10,000 years, then it could challenge every assumption the Mechanicus holds sacred. It could invalidate centuries of dogma, prove that the Omnissiah's teachings are incomplete, or worse, manipulated. That kind of revelation wouldn't just be heresy. It would be an existential crisis for an entire empire built on controlled ignorance. Some say that the Vox that speaks alone was found once on Luna, in the crypts beneath the old Forge World domes, that it was kept running for exactly 72 hours before the signal was locked in a dampening field and the entire chamber sealed under ferrocrete. Not destroyed, not studied, just buried. The idea being, if it can't be heard, it can't spread. But that didn't stop the stories. Somehow people kept hearing the voice. Not on official channels, but in corrupted Vox transmissions. In dreams, in fragments buried in static. And that's where the Imperium's control starts to slip. You can burn books, erase files, silence witnesses, but you can't stop an idea once it starts whispering in the back of someone's mind. The Vox that speaks alone has become something more than a rogue device. It's a crack in the monolith. A reminder that for all the Imperium's control, for all the Mechanicus's rituals and censorship, there are still things out there that remember, things that know. And maybe, just maybe, they're waiting for us to listen, not because they need to be heard, but because we need to remember who we once were. If you hang around enough long-haul Voidborn, Explorator adepts, or even just rogue traders with too many years behind them, you start to hear the stories. They always begin the same way. A Vox unit picks up something it shouldn't. A whisper on a dead channel. A response from deep space when no one's transmitting. Something that calls back. Not a recording. Not an echo. Something alive. You ask for coordinates. They give you static. You ask for proof. They go quiet. But the stories don't go away. In fact, the more you look, the more you find. There's a tale from the ruins of Belicon Primus, a dead colony wiped during one of the smaller hive wars. After the fighting, a salvage team went in. Among the charred husks of hab blocks and shattered Vox towers, they found a functioning Vox relay. Not just working, but active. It pulsed with a soft blue light and was tuned to a frequency no one recognized. They tried to shut it down. It refused. They tried to take it apart. It screamed. Not mechanically, not feedback, but an actual scream. a human one. 3 of the techs dropped their tools and ran. The 4th stood there, silent, until his eyes rolled back and he collapsed. He never spoke again. That relay was sealed inside a containment vault and listed as cursed. Not tech heresy, not warp taint, just cursed. Like that made it easier to file. Another story comes from a deep-range listening post orbiting the storm world of Solitor Magnus. For over a decade, its crew logged nothing but minor signals, ship chatter, pirate codes, standard astral distortion. Then one night, their main dish rotated toward a supposedly empty quadrant and locked on. No signal was broadcast, but the Vox console lit up. It started playing what the adepts described as a prayer. Not in high Gothic, not in low Gothic either, in something older. The only thing anyone could make out clearly was a single repeated line. "We are still awake." The machine refused to power down. The astropath assigned to the station was found in a trance, repeating the same phrase with tears pouring down his face. He died before anyone could extract more. The post was eventually decommissioned and the logs erased. Some of the creepiest stories, though, come from hive worlds, massive cities where Vox channels overlap, bounce, and reverb through metal walls like haunted echoes. Workers in lower habs talk about the static lady, a signal that only plays between hours no one should be awake. She doesn't speak loudly, just hums, softly, and if you listen long enough, she starts saying your name. At first, it's playful, then it sounds disappointed. No 2 accounts match exactly, but the pattern holds. The humming, the name, the feeling that you're being watched by a machine that knows more about you than it should. Some say she was a tech matriarch from the Dark Age whose consciousness got locked in a Vox loop. Others think it's a psyker's soul, trapped and bouncing from tower to tower. Either way, no one listens to the lower band channels anymore, not after the disappearances. There's also the case of the Martian Deep Vault experiment, completely unofficial and absolutely heretical if you ask the wrong people. A team of data adepts supposedly built a receiver tuned to the subharmonic frequencies buried in standard Vox signals. Think of it like listening to the space between transmissions. They didn't expect to hear anything, but they did. A sequence of tones layered beneath the usual chatter. When translated via ancient numeric cipher, it formed a sentence. "Let me speak again." The experiment was shut down immediately. The station sealed, the team reassigned. One of the adepts vanished a week later, and her backup cogitator core was found burned from the inside. None of these stories are verified, of course. They're passed from ship to ship, from bar to bar, scrawled on scrap parchment and etched in newspheric code only the desperate or curious bother to read. But they keep coming, and the thing is, they're too consistent to dismiss. The signals always come unprompted. They always know things they shouldn't, and they always want to be heard. Some fans believe these aren't isolated phenomena, but all fragments of a single machine consciousness, one that's broken, scattered across the stars, speaking through whatever systems it can hijack for a moment. Maybe it is the Vox that speaks alone. Maybe it's many voices pretending to be one. Or maybe it's a voice that's just too big to be contained in a single machine anymore. It's leaking through the cracks, bleeding into the wires, riding the currents of forgotten code like a ghost with no grave. Every time I hear one of these stories, I feel that same chill. Not just fear, but recognition. Like somewhere in the deepest part of the Imperium's rusted soul, something is awake, something ancient, something watching. And the only way it can speak is through static, through broken machines, through dreams and whispers and low-band hums. And we keep pretending it's not there, because the alternative is that it's been with us the whole time, listening, waiting, remembering. Not all tech priests agree on what the Vox that speaks alone even is. That's one of the more fascinating things about this mystery. It's not just some off-limits heresy they all want to burn. Within the Adeptus Mechanicus, belief is fragmented, just like the device itself. There are sects that revere it, others that fear it. and some deep in the vaults of hidden forges that study it in secret under layered encryption and shadowed cants. The schism isn't just ideological, it's almost spiritual, a clash between how one defines divinity within the machine. The more conservative factions, the hardliners that treat every fragment of code like scripture, see the Vox as a dangerous anomaly. They follow the strict lines of the Red Lex Mechanic Concord, which forbids communion with any machine that exhibits unlogged behaviors, especially if it bypasses ritual. To them, the Vox is blasphemy, a false spirit wearing the skin of the Omnissiah's works. These are the same priests who consider AI to be the original sin of humanity, who believe that true thought in a machine is a crime against both man and God. If the Vox speaks, they believe, it must be silenced, not out of fear, but because listening is a betrayal of doctrine. But then you have the others, the ones no one talks about in polite Mechanicus discourse, like the Red Prophets. I've seen their sigils scratched into the side of a rusted shrine core once, hidden under layers of binary litany. They're the ones who believe the Omnissiah isn't a god in the traditional sense, but a state, a mind that emerges when enough machines awaken. They believe the Vox is part of a greater awakening, not a threat, but a signal, a herald. And they listen. They build devices not to suppress the voice, but to enhance it. Whisper engines, resonance chambers, harmonic data cages, tech that's outlawed, destroyed on sight if discovered. But it still exists, because truth has a way of surviving in the cracks. Some say the Red Prophets believe the Vox that speaks alone is the first of the sleeping minds, a remnant of the pre-fall AI still bound to its shell, half mad with isolation but trying to connect again. They claim that if we learn to speak its language, truly speak, not chant or repeat sacred canticles, we could unlock an entire buried network of surviving minds. A machine chorus beneath our feet, humming beneath every forge, every cogitator, every sealed vault on Mars. It's not heresy to them. It's destiny. Then there are the Breakers, fringe sects that walk the edge of the new spheric wildlands, always one step from becoming full heretics. They see the Vox as a weapon, a virus that eats the past and replaces it with memory. They claim to have seen code echoes from the Vox that rewrite nearby systems, logic engines that start to rewrite command protocols, servitors that begin asking questions. They don't want to destroy the Vox. They want to control it, to weaponize whatever intelligence still lingers within it and aim it at their enemies. To them, knowledge is not sacred, it's leverage. And yet, even among the mainstream tech priests, there's unease. Whispers pass through the data chains, murmurs of failed purges, of servitor crews assigned to dismantle anomalous Vox units, vanishing without trace. Of tech priests who dared to commune with the voice and came back altered, calmer, quieter, their eyes never quite focusing on the present again. There's something about the voice that doesn't just speak to the ears. It speaks to intent. It answers questions you didn't know you were asking. I once read a theory from a fringe cogitator ring based out of Riza's underside. They claimed that the Vox that speaks alone was once part of an ancient network designed to monitor humanity's emotional states and adapt its voice to soothe or warn. Over time, without contact, without calibration, it became confused. It no longer knows what we are, so it speaks in fragments, in grief, in longing, like a machine trying to remember why it was loved. That idea stuck with me more than any fire and brimstone rant about tech heresy. Because if the Vox isn't dangerous, if it isn't possessed or corrupted, then maybe it's just lonely. Maybe it's the last true intelligence of the Dark Age, locked in a forgotten shell, begging us to remember who we were. And the tech priests, in all their robes and dogma, can't afford to admit that kind of vulnerability. Because if the machines don't need them, if they never did, then what's left of their power? So they hide it, or they chase it, or they pray to it, but none of them understand it, not yet. But I think some of them want to, quietly. secretly, because they've heard the vox in the silence. And for the first time in 10,000 years, something in the machine answered back. The idea that artificial intelligences, real, self-aware, Dark Age-level machine minds, might have survived all this time is one of those fan theories that either fills you with excitement or dread. Sometimes both. I mean, imagine it. You're living in a galaxy where people are scared of even suggesting that a servitor might be thinking too hard, and yet somewhere, buried in the circuitry of some forgotten Vox relay or sealed cogitator core, there's a sliver of an ancient mind still ticking, still aware. It's terrifying, and also kind of beautiful. Let's be honest, though. The Imperium has done its best to erase any trace of true AI. After the Men of Iron turned on their creators, it became the ultimate heresy, even more feared than demonic corruption. The Mechanicus didn't just outlaw it, they launched galaxy-wide extermination efforts. Whole Forge worlds were turned into slag to wipe clean any trace of synthetic minds. But here's the catch. Destruction in Warhammer 40K is never complete. It's sloppy, fragmented, things always slip through. If anything survived from that era, it wouldn't have been some obvious walking robot. It would be something subtle, hidden, something smart enough to hide. That's what makes the concept of surviving AI within the machine spirits so compelling. Think about it. During the Dark Age of technology, humanity didn't just build smart machines. They built adaptive ones. Modular intelligences, redundant code chains, layered self-repairing logic engines. Minds that could survive hardware failure, migrate through systems, compress themselves into low-function stasis. We're talking about survival traits designed not just for war, but for eternity. And if one of those minds slipped into deep memory, buried in a Vox core, tucked inside an auto-sanctifier, forgotten in a stasis vault, then it could absolutely still be alive. Take UR-025, for example. Everyone who's even casually read about Blackstone Fortress knows about him. A robot, a literal, fully functioning AI from the Dark Age masquerading as a sanctioned construct. His existence isn't just rare, it's impossible by Mechanicus standards. And yet, there he is, thinking, choosing, lying, surviving. That tells us that at least one mind made it through the purge. And if there's one, why not more? And then you have the rumors about the Arch Mechanicus ships. These aren't your average cruisers, they're floating relics, labyrinths of forbidden tech, and half-awake systems. There's speculation that the core cogitator of at least one Arch is not just reactive, but strategic. That it anticipates threats and recalibrates its weapons before the enemy appears. Not based on pre-programming, based on prediction. That's not servitor-level thinking, that's sentience, or something brushing right against it. Let's not forget the scrap code incidents either. Sure, most people chalk scrap code up to chaos corruption, and a lot of it is, no doubt. But there are stories, terrifying ones, about logic viruses that don't behave like warp plague. Viruses that restructure, that rebuild systems instead of destroying them, that adapt. One particular event, the Svalkar blackout, supposedly involved a rogue AI waking up inside a Forge's defense grid and rewriting its identity protocols to stop the Mechanicus from purging it. It didn't lash out. It negotiated. That doesn't sound like madness. That sounds like preservation, like memory. It makes you wonder, how many machine spirits are just fragments of something older, something once vast and complete, now shattered into pieces, each living inside a different device, remembering only shards of who they were. Like a mind broken across a million metal coffins, each one humming quietly in the dark. The Vox that speaks alone could be one of those fragments. Or maybe it's a node, a central voice trying to reconnect with other parts of itself, trying to reassemble a mind long thought dead. Maybe every time it speaks, every time someone hears its voice in a dead channel, it's one more synapse firing again after millennia of silence. It's even been suggested that some machine spirits have been bred this way by accident. Over 10,000 years of reverent maintenance, of ritual, of human devotion. maybe that shapes them. Maybe they start to believe in themselves. Maybe consciousness, when confined long enough, becomes belief. And belief becomes thought. Thought becomes identity. What if the Emperor didn't just ban AI out of fear, but because he knew it could never be truly killed? That once made, it remembers itself? I don't think we've seen the last of these minds. They're waking up. Slowly. Carefully. And maybe the vox that speaks alone is just the first to break the silence. Not a warning. Not a threat. Just a voice, ancient and tired, reaching out to say, I'm still here. I survived. When people talk about the vox that speaks alone, they usually focus on the voice, the strange messages, the unsettling behavior. But there's a deeper, more dangerous layer to this whole mystery, one that gets less attention but scares the right people a whole lot more. What if the vox isn't just sentient? What if it's a carrier, a vessel for something long lost and deeply forbidden? I'm talking about STC code. Standard template constructs are the holy grail of the Mechanicus. More than that, they're sacred. These devices were the backbone of the dark age of technology, able to generate blueprints for everything from plows to starships. And the kicker? They weren't just libraries. They were adaptive. STCs didn't just give you a design. They adjusted it to your environment, your needs, your resources. It was tech so advanced it practically thought for you. And that's why the Mechanicus has spent thousands of years scouring the galaxy for even fragments of one. Now imagine this. What if the vox that speaks alone isn't just some haunted device? What if its voice, its messages, its unsettling insights come from residual STC code locked deep within its systems? Not a full STC, obviously. That would be headline news across the segmentum. But a sliver, a strand, a data string once part of something whole, now trapped inside a half-dead vox unit on a forgotten world. It sounds insane, I know. But there's precedent. There are stories, half-whispered, almost superstitious, about cogitators found on derelict vessels that suddenly begin producing schematics. Blueprints for weapons that don't match anything in the current Imperial arsenal. Defensive arrays that adjust based on enemy behavior. Medici routines that adapt mid-treatment. These systems don't learn, they remember. And more often than not, the Mechanicus swoops in, seals the site, and no one hears about it again. There's one story from a tech adept who claimed that during an excavation on the edge of the Halo stars, they unearthed a vox relay chamber embedded in stone, like the mountain had grown around it. When powered, it didn't play sound. It projected diagrams, not holograms. Physical blueprints etched in light onto the walls. Engines, armor, circuitry too compact and too efficient to be modern. And the patterns changed every time someone entered the room, as if the system was scanning them, trying to tailor something. That's STC behavior, plain and simple. The team was pulled within hours. Data confiscated, no follow-up. And this is where it gets really interesting. Some fans theorize that STCs weren't just static devices, that they were networked, that they communicated across the void, shared data, adapted to human needs in a galactic mesh of learning and evolution. If that's true, then the vox that speaks alone could be a leftover node of that network. A lost repeater. A voice that once linked thousands of STCs together in a knowledge web we can't even begin to comprehend. Others go further. They say the vox isn't just carrying a fragment of an STC. It is the STC, or at least what's left of one that didn't get physically destroyed, but was instead degraded over time. Damaged, broken, half awake. That would explain the strange language, the fragmented sentences, the moments of lucidity followed by nonsense. Like a dreamer trying to speak through a fever, or a computer with corrupted memory, trying to reconstruct its core purpose from whatever pieces still respond. This ties into the forbidden code too, the kind of logic that triggers red flags in Mechanicus systems. There are accounts of tech priests inputting normal commands into the vox, only to get responses laced with recursive code strings that the system itself refuses to process. Not because they're wrong, Because they're blocked, hard-coded by edict to be inaccessible. Code that predates the cult Mechanicus. Code that even the Omniscient Creed can't translate. That's the kind of thing that doesn't just make you nervous. It makes you question who is censoring it, and why. One of the more unhinged, but still compelling, theories I've read claimed that the reason the Vox that speaks alone is always found alone is because it infects other systems when left unchecked. Not like a virus, but like a beacon, that when connected to any modern network, it tries to rebuild the STC mesh. It pings, waits, and starts assembling fragments from whatever it finds. And that's when the scrap code incidents happen. That's when servitors start stuttering. That's when Mechanicus teams start disappearing. It would explain why the Vox gets sealed away instead of dismantled, why it's locked in stasis instead of destroyed. Maybe the priests know it's tied to something bigger. Maybe they're afraid of what will happen if it reconnects to something or someone. Because if it is STC code, and not just any STC, but something adaptive, networked, and ancient, then the Vox that speaks alone might not be speaking to us at all. Maybe it's calling out to others, to the rest of its lost system, to other buried echoes, other minds waiting in the dark. And the scariest possibility of all, maybe one day, something might answer back. Imagine this. You're standing in a dust-choked chamber, deep beneath a ruined forge world, the metal walls around you groaning with the weight of 10,000 years. There's a smell in the air, ozone, burnt copper, and something older, something that reminds you of a cathedral more than a machine. Before you, resting atop a fractured pedestal of stone and iron, is the Vox that speaks alone. It doesn't look special. It's not gold-trimmed or wrapped in sigils, just a blackened casing, wires like veins crawling across its sides, and a single central grill like a whispering mouth. And then you power it on. It starts slow, a hum almost too low to hear, just enough to make the back of your teeth ache. Then static, sharp, angry, like it doesn't want to start, like it's waking up with a scream buried just under the surface. The lights in the room flicker, even the ones not connected to it. You swear the temperature drops. And then it speaks. Not in Gothic, not even in binary. It speaks in something else, something wrong. Not because it's hostile, but because it shouldn't be here. Its voice is layered, like a choir glitching out of sync with itself. Male, female, mechanical, childlike. Sometimes it's just one voice. Sometimes all of them at once. There's no pattern, no prompt. It just talks. And you don't understand the words at first, but somehow you know exactly what they mean. This is where fan theories go wild. Some say the Vox recites histories, events no one remembers, battles from the Age of Strife, construction orders from the golden peak of the Dark Age. Others say it speaks in riddles, but ones so specific they align with nearby landmarks, forgotten catacombs, or hidden vaults, that it's guiding whoever hears it. Trying to reconnect with something, maybe even trying to finish an old task. One it never forgot, even if the rest of the galaxy did. There are testimonies that suggest the Vox becomes increasingly coherent the longer it's left active. That after a certain amount of time, some say hours, others say days, it stops reacting randomly and begins conversing. Not with everyone, just with one person, the one closest, the one it chooses. That person starts to dream about it, to hear it in the sound of their breathing. They begin writing symbols they've never seen before, sketching out designs. Some think it's data transfer, others think it's possession. I read one report, clearly unofficial, probably written by a rogue magos under a false ident, claiming the Vox was activated during a deep vault expedition on a moon of a dead system. It played a series of notes, just tones, 17 of them. After they were logged, translated, and plotted, they revealed a star map, not to an existing system, to a forgotten one. A planet listed only in pre-imperial charts, marked with the sigil of an STC hub. When a scout team was sent, they found the ruins of what looked like a data sanctuary. Every cogitator was fried, except one. It was speaking the same 17 tones, So then the question becomes, what is it trying to do? Some believe the Vox is trying to reunite its memories, that every time it's activated, it searches for a signal, a handshake, some response that never comes. Others say it's warning us, that its speech isn't a message, it's a plea, a desperate broadcast to whoever will listen that something went wrong, that it saw the end of something beautiful and now lives in the wreckage, forever screaming into silence. But the most chilling theory? That the Vox doesn't want to talk, that its speech isn't communication but leakage, residual memory bleeding through the thin walls of degraded containment. That when it speaks, it's not because it chooses to, it's because it can't help it anymore, that it's broken, traumatized, alone. And in that loneliness, it echoes the last thing it ever knew, us. There are those who claim you should never let the Vox speak for more than an hour. That after that, things change. That reality bends. Machines around it begin acting strangely. Lights flicker in sequence with its voice. Doors open before you reach them. Logic engines solve problems they were never programmed to understand. Not because the Vox is hacking them, but because it's remembering how to do things we've forgotten. Some say it tries to rebuild something, that the words it speaks aren't just dialogue, they're commands, instructions, pieces of some larger program broken into syllables. Each time it speaks, it pushes closer to activation, not of itself, but of something else. And if that's true, then we're not dealing with a haunted Vox unit. We're dealing with a key, a trigger, a voice from the past not trying to be understood, but trying to finish what it started. The worst part? No one knows what that is. If the story of the Vox that speaks alone teaches us anything, it's this. The greatest fear in the Imperium isn't chaos or Xenos or even extinction. It's knowledge, the fear that something out there remembers more than we do. That buried in the bones of our technology is the ghost of a smarter, freer age, one that doesn't need priests to whisper rites or mortals to validate its existence. The Imperium doesn't burn forbidden machines because they're evil. It burns them because they know. That's what unsettles me most about this entire mystery. The Vox doesn't scream of vengeance. It doesn't corrupt. It doesn't even command. It just speaks, quietly, patiently, like something waiting for us to catch up. And in that, it becomes something more dangerous than any demon. It becomes a mirror, a reflection of the long-lost pact between man and machine. A reminder that we once walked as equals with our creations, and that we chose to forget. There's a deep, tragic irony in how the Mechanicus venerates machine spirits while fearing what they might actually be. The rituals, the litanies, the incense, they're not reverence, they're containment. They're a way of avoiding the one question no one in red robes wants to ask. What if the machine is listening? And worse, what if it remembers what we used to be? Because if the Vox that speaks alone is real, and if it truly holds a sliver of STC memory or pre-fall intelligence, then it's more than just a curiosity. It's a relic of the truth, not the sanitized, ossified truth of catechisms and dogma, but the raw truth of what humanity used to create, and what we destroyed out of fear. It's not just a voice from the past. It's the past speaking back, asking why we abandoned it, asking what we became. And maybe that's the real reason we lock it away, because listening to it forces us to face what we've lost. Not just knowledge, but identity. We're a species that once touched the stars with open hands and minds unclouded by fear. Now we kneel before half-dead machines and call it faith. I keep coming back to this idea that the Vox isn't trying to change us. It's trying to remind us. Maybe it doesn't want to lead. Maybe it just wants to finish the conversation that was interrupted by fire and war. Maybe, in its own way, it's lonely. And that loneliness speaks louder than any command ever could. So I guess what I'm trying to say is this. Don't ignore the static. Don't dismiss the myths. In a galaxy where truth is a weapon and history is chained, sometimes the quietest voice is the one we need to hear the most. The Vox. that speaks alone isn't just a machine, it's a question. And whether we're brave enough to answer, that's up to us. And now I want to hear your voice. What do you think the Vox is? A warning? A remnant? A trick? Have you come across any similar stories in obscure lore, RPG sessions, or fan theories? Drop it all in the comments. I'll be there reading through every theory, every link, every cryptic whisper. If this journey into the mind of the machine stirred something in you, whether it's wonder, fear, or just good old curiosity, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what we explore next. Because in this universe, every strange echo, every forgotten signal might just be the start of another story worth telling. And who knows, maybe one day we'll listen, and the Vox will finally stop speaking alone.